What if I tell you all theories and commonly accepted concepts about human growth and maturity have flaws, and they are unable to meet the needs of human beings, and they have been unable to provide flawless communities and societies to human beings? Hello everyone, this is Dr. Naqeebullah Zaki, a medical doctor by profession, a Ph.D. candidate in mental health, and a humanitarian actor for the last 10 years, currently looking and overseeing the health and nutrition needs of some 300,000 Afghans in 10 provinces of the country. I have been born as an Afghan, I have grown as an Afghan, and I am one of the millions of Afghans who have suffered all the sorrows, pains, griefs, and the poverty and unemployment and all other sort of pains and crisis disasters someone can even imagine. Name of Afghanistan is known for all what I have said. But I am only one of the millions. Now in my 40s, I have always been curious and skeptical and asking this question from myself and working with different communities, with different intellectuals and experts from the international communities. What is the main parameter or factor that determines the growth, success, development of communities? And what is the major factor that is the reason for the backwardness of nations? This has always been on my mind, and I have always been questioning this question from myself. Having said that, there are over 200 countries in this world, some developed, some underdeveloped, some so-called developing, some with lesser geographical location, with huge population, but so-called developed. Some with huge national resources, a lot of population, but they are living in poverty. So what is the reason behind this so-called developed and underdeveloped nations as indicated by different indicators and parameters in economics and World Bank and all those institutes? Afghanistan is known to be a very rich country with a lot of minerals, a lot of priceless elements, beautiful sun, beautiful sky, a lot of water, a lot of natural resources. Some 40 million Afghans are living in this country, a very dynamic population of over 25 million Afghans being young, energetic, looking to work, willing to work, have the energy, have the expertise, have the capabilities, but are in unemployment. So when you see the potential resources of Afghanistan and you see the actual condition of Afghanistan, there is a huge difference. There is a potential resources, natural resources, and human resources, and then you see the actual picture of Afghanistan, so-called one of the most poor countries in the world. You see, when you see the figures of Afghanistan, Afghanistan is in the bottom when it comes to poverty, unemployment, refugees, and all the crises and the disasters. I have always been asking this question, what is the main parameter that is making us live in such conditions where we have natural resources, we have human resources, we can put this together and we can be one of the so-called developed countries, but that's not happening, and it's not for the one generation. As I tell you this, I came through to see the GDP per capita of Afghanistan in the last 60 years of Afghanistan. It is heartbreaking to see that in the last 60 years of Afghanistan, starting from 1960 to 2020, the highest GDP per capita of Afghanistan has only been 600. It started from 100, the peak was 600, it's now 350 as per the open data of the World Bank. So there are miseries, there is pain, there is loss of hope, there is refugees, there is chaos, there is unemployment, there is poverty, but what is really the reason? What is the main factor that determines all these conditions for Afghanistan? And how can we swallow this? How can we digest this fact and this reality? I have asked this question from intellectuals. I have spoken to philosophers. I have been in an environment in a humanitarian context where I have spoken and shared these queries with experts from plenty of countries, but none of them has provided me a convincing answer. It is recently that I have come to see a concept for the first time grounded by Professor Abdul Bari Rashid with a concept that the real theory of growth and maturity of the human being is the main factor that determines the growth, success, development, and on the other side, the backwardness of society. So he then moves forward and put the theory as that ideal human being has 4 types of maturity and growth. First and foremost is the physical growth. So when a mother's egg is fertilized by a father's sperm, so it's only 0.1 millimeter. And then now grows to a 30 to 40 centimeters of a new baby born, and then it's the infant, and then it's childhood, and then it's teenage, and then it's the youth and adults. So this is probably one of the known growth and maturity of human being, which is very similar with other creatures, even animals. As they are small, they don't have mass, they don't have power, they cannot deliver, they cannot provide. But the complete physical growth is defined as the complete physical growth of the transition of the childhood to full physical and biological maturity of a human being, where a girl and a boy can have the capabilities after the hormonal and biological changes that they can be parents themselves, and they can provide and they can reproduce the next generation. And they can also be of some help to the physical services and to the physical activities of contributing to the society. But that's not the only thing. The second growth of a human being is the mental growth. Remember, human beings were born with knowing nothing. They didn't have any idea of where are we coming, how our fathers would look like, how our relatives would look like. They didn't have any idea of how the other phenomena and the creatures in this universe would look like. They didn't have any idea of how birds look like, how flowers look like, how flowers smell. They didn't have any idea of how other tastes would be tasting. But it's then the mental growth that comes to the arena. It starts from the day human beings are born, and it ends when human beings wrap up and they go from this universe. So they put the data into their brain. They are feeded their data into their brain from the 5 senses, particularly after hearing and after seeing those data. So mental growth is the acquisition of education and information. It starts from the very primary elementary schools, and it can end in the Ph.D., post-Ph.D., and beyond of that. So you feed data, you memorize data, you remember data, your brain is full of information and education. So that is your mental growth. This is important after you do a particular course of works and you meet some timelines and some targets. Then you're provided different degrees, such as master's degree, PhD degree, or post-PhD degree. That is the outcome of the mental growth for a human being. And it is important, it leads your way to the third type of the growth and maturity, which is the intellectual growth and maturity. Intellectual growth and maturity is different. It is a progressive acquisition of information which leads to masters of information through activities such as research, investigation, innovation, invention, creation, transformation of new things, new phenomena, and new formulas which someone before you have not done that. Mental growth helps you with the information that is fed to your brain, and then it leads to the intellectual growth of a human beings, where you come with new phenomena, a new formula, and new things which no one has invented, no one has spoken before yourself. So if you remember Einstein, Newton, and Tesla, and others, those names in our brain, and the like of theirs, there is one reason for them. These so-called scholars were intellectual growth, having people which we remember as of now. Not ideally that everyone who has a degree and who is graduated from a particular area or sector is having that intellectual growth. But if we remember these most names and these prominent names, is because of their intellectual growth. Intellectual growth alone cannot help human beings work for justice, for social justice, and for brotherhood, and for all the moral and ethical values that are required in a human society. It is very risky to have all these three types of growth, but not have the fourth type of growth, which is spiritual growth. Not having spiritual growth on the individual level in individual circumstances leads to a lot of chaoses, a lot of problems. The main reason for depression, the main reason for anxiety, the main reason for crimes, the main reason for addiction, even suicide, is not having spiritual growth. When I say not having spiritual growth, you will be shocked to hear that countries that are developed They have a lot of financial resources. They have good academia. They have intellectuals. Their leaders are so intellectual and they are so smart. There are huge chaoses when it comes to the morality. MBC latest reports indicates that only in 2023, some 50,000 Americans have committed suicides. That is only a peak of this big mountain where a lot of data is not being reported. Having said that is an attempt of suicide every 27 seconds in the USA. Remember, when we see these figures, it is a country that have more than 27 trillion of GDP as per 2023. So huge financial resources, but when it comes to the morality, we have suicides, we have crimes, we have the biggest prisons in there, we have the huge number of criminals and prisoners which are living in such of countries. On a bigger picture, on a general picture or a social picture, not having the spiritual growth leads to chaoses on a bigger arena. Massive destructions, genocides, mass massacres, destruction of countries, conflicts, wars, disasters. This is what it comes for leaders who do not have spiritual growth. They have the mental growth, they have the intellectual growth, they have that political conscience to resolve all complexities of social complicities and issues, but not having that spiritual growth leads these leaders to using biological weapons, using all those atomic bombs, and using those chemical weapons. Why all this depression? Why all this wars? Why all these conflicts? Why all this poverty? And imposing poverty on nations on a bigger arena, making billions of people living in starvation and poverty. That's not because of having the spiritual growth. Dr. Abdul Bari Rashid moves then on to classify the spiritual growth into 3 levels. The primary level, or the first level of the spiritual growth, he then defines as at least as shining someone's character, at least not to harm others. That's the minimum spiritual growth, if others are safe and they are not being harmed for our personal causes. The second level of spiritual growth, he then defines as not only refraining from harming others, but also to be of support, help to others, and your best of the capacity and the resources available to you. He then goes to say the third level of the spiritual growth is not harming anyone, not harming anything, not harming anyone and anywhere, regardless of the differences they might have with you. But that's only possible when you have the spiritual growth in the third level, and even you can sacrifice. You will give out your best things to others. You will then be, in reality, convinced to say and stick to the realities as you would say human rights, women's rights, environmental protection, child rights, and all those things we hear, but we don't see exactly them being executed on the ground realities. We, as of now in 2024, see what is happening in the world. So the topic as of now is, when is the third world war being started? Where is it starting? No one is saying about how should we reduce, how should we resolve this, how should prevent this. Everyone is saying from where should it start. It's only a matter of seconds, that's what they are discussing. It's millions and billions of dollars that are being spent in weapons and artilleries and things that are of no use for human beings. In contrary, that is a destruction, killing, and removing the human beings and the like of ourselves. So when we say human beings have 4 types of growth: physical growth, mental growth, intellectual growth, and their spiritual growth, and spiritual growth into 3 levels. We now come to a question: how do we get this spiritual growth? Spiritual growth is only in the divine studies, and it's in the theology, God-knowing, self-knowing, and self-inner purification. That's the only source and the only area someone can get that spiritual growth. So that will lead to an area where we have communities, we have societies, where there is food, there is water, there is shelter, there is health, there is medicine for everyone, and there is justice, and there is brotherhood, and there is sacrifice, and there is security, and there is happiness, everyone, for all people in all societies. So when we come to a conclusion, how do we reach this? It is a proper education system that will guarantee these 4 types of growth and maturity for human beings. We need to be very curious of the education. We need to be very curious about the system of education that we are giving and how we provide that maturity and that circumstances and that platform so that we evolve our next generation. So that the education system should have the curriculums for their mental growth, feeding the data, productive data, positive data into their brains, providing laboratories and investigations and areas of research where they can think and they can invent and they can invent and they can transform new things and they can provide new things for the comfort of the human beings. It is equally important that our education system greatly emphasizes on the spiritual growth and using, regardless of someone, whatever religion they might believe in. Remember, atheist, non-atheist, someone who is religious, someone who is not religious, every human being has a soul. It is important that soul is being fed with positive foods. Just like we feed our body so that we grow, we need to feed our soul with positive feeding so that we can grow spiritually, so that we have communities where there's prosperity, there is growth, and there is development for our countries, and everyone in this world can live in peace and prosperous society. Thank you, everyone.